I can't imagine a world without animals. Companion animals share our lives and our homes. We have countless interactions with animals daily, whether it's patting cats on the way home from work, spotting a wild boar on a hike, or learning which common farm animal doesn't have teeth on their upper jaw. Our affinity for animals is undeniable. As such, and very poignantly, Albert Schweitzer said, "Animal protection is education to humanity." And I agree. Our understanding of animal welfare and protection is a vital component to ensuring we as human beings develop respect, kindness, empathy, and positive attitudes towards both animals and people. Just a little bit about me personally. My mother is Hong Kong Chinese and my father a New Zealander. I was born in Hong Kong and moved to New Zealand at a very young age, so I'm extremely grateful to have had the best of both worlds. Growing up in New Zealand is remarkably different to a childhood in Hong Kong. As a young kid, I was running around barefoot, climbing trees and learning about the power of electric fences, often through not so clever decision making. But this was a childhood I loved and cherish to this day, perhaps to the protestation of my very conservative Chinese mother. But the greatest experience I ever had throughout my childhood was the variety of interactions I had with animals. Of course, when a nation's nickname is based off its national bird, it becomes obvious just how highly regarded New Zealanders treat animals. The vast ovine herd that outnumber human New Zealanders have always been a running joke outside of the country. In the early 1980s, the country once had enough sheep to provide a small flock for every single person, with the ratio peaking at 22 sheep for every human in the early 1980s. However, with the decline in the international wool markets and forestry emerging as a more lucrative use of the land, New Zealand's ratio of sheep to people now sits at approximately 5 to 1, and in fact the lowest point in 170 years. Farming and agriculture remain major rural activities in New Zealand, with sheep farming, beef cattle and dairying all prevalent throughout the islands. In 2022 to 2023, New Zealand's farm exports are projected to be roughly Hong Kong $275 billion. The incredible economic derivation from agriculture therefore informs the importance of ethical modes of farming to locals. Now, although I didn't grow up on a farm, we were lucky enough to have a bit of land which allowed us to provide a home for different species of animals. My father always loved cats, so throughout my childhood, we played host to approximately 20 different rescue cats from the New Zealand SPCA. We've had 2 dogs, sheep, ducks, and even some peacocks. It became our little farm and it allowed me to grow an appreciation of the difference in care, attention, and welfare between the different species we had. In New Zealand, it's estimated that companion animal ownership is approximately 64%. And ranks second in the world behind the United States with 67%. Compare this to Hong Kong, where it sits at a measly 10%. So it's no surprise to find friends who have animals at home and who, like me, treated their pets as an extension of their family. We're also an island nation, so far removed from the rest of the world and home to a unique variety of flora and fauna. This requires significant impetus on both locals and visitors to ensure they remain predator and disease-free. This is partially why, before you enter New Zealand, the Customs Service requires all entrants to fill out a Mensa-level custom declaration. While generally animals in New Zealand are treated with respect, it's not to say animal cruelty does not feature there either. There are still cases where farmers neglect their livestock. Pet owners callously abuse their companion animals, and even New Zealand representative rugby players have been found in trouble for clubbing and shooting helpless seals. But there is, for the majority, a mutual respect and understanding by New Zealanders that animals are here with us and not for us. As tangata whenua, people of the land of New Zealand, who share the land with animals, there's been a deeply instilled moral acceptance that we need to protect them. I practiced as a barrister after university in New Zealand, and I became heavily involved with the New Zealand Animal Law Association. It allowed me first opportunity to properly consider animals in the context of the law. And it was from then I almost became obsessive with learning about how the different relationships animals had with the law. So when I moved back to Hong Kong and resumed a career at the bar, it's fair to say I knew little to nothing about animal law in Hong Kong. During the first wave of the COVID pandemic, the courts in Hong Kong closed for a long period of time, and I sat at home questioning what I wanted to do in a sort of mid-career crisis. It was my wife who led me to the realization that what I not only wanted, but needed to do was focus my time and dedication to animals in Hong Kong. Now, fortunately for us in Hong Kong, we have so many passionate and knowledgeable animal advocates who have devoted themselves to improving the welfare of animals, including all of our speakers that you'll hear from today. But one name I must mention personally is Professor Amanda Whitfield, who remains one of the most influential and inspirational people I've ever met. She's made significant inroads for animals, and her passion motivated me to begin the Hong Kong Animal Law and Protection Organisation, or HKALPO. ALPO was formed to bring together lawyers, students, and other professionals who have a shared passion for animals to work together to improve the welfare and lives of these animals. We aim to do this through advocating for the interests through the legal system by securing more thorough and protective laws and better enforcement of existing animal welfare law. We try and educate people on the present status of the law, not just locally, but also overseas, to allow for a direct comparison and understanding, not just for what needs to change, but why. We also look to grow the field of animal law to encourage more people to consider this as a field of practice. Now, despite best efforts, it's obvious here that animal law has not been given the proper attention and emphasis that it deserves in the courts and legislative levels, and there remains a lot of work that still needs to be done. When I started ALPO, I admit I was reasonably blind to the variety of issues plaguing animals in Hong Kong. But the more I learned, the more eye-opening and shocking it became. One thing was for certain, I had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. Animal welfare science looks at the welfare of animals as pets in zoos, laboratories, on farms, and in the wild. It does this by studying the structure and behavior of animals through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained. And although animal welfare has been a great concern for thousands of years in religion and culture, the investigation of animal welfare using rigorous scientific methods is a relatively recent development. While not a scientist myself, but wearing a legal practitioner's hat, I can see the incredible value that empirical data can provide to legal decisions made for and on behalf of animals. So what has science taught us? Evidence from multiple scientific studies have helped us understand that animals are sentient. This means they have a capacity to experience positive and negative feelings such as pleasure, joy, pain, and distress. There are scientific studies that cast doubt on whether inclusion of certain exotic animal parts in traditional Chinese medicine will make you run faster, jump higher, or swim faster. We've seen shifts in the zoo and aquaria communities' approach to welfare of the animals they house on the back of emerging new perspectives on welfare assessments. Furthermore, we have all undoubtedly heard of the 5 freedoms. They are internationally accepted standards of care that affirm every living being's right to humane treatment, being the freedom from hunger and thirst, from discomfort, from pain and injury and disease, freedom to express normal behavior, and the freedom from fear and distress. These principles ensure we meet the mental and physical needs of our animals in our care. Scientific knowledge and reasoning, especially when considering animal welfare, helps us make decisions by allowing a person to make accurate predictions. The rational inquiry process allows us to derive explanations from the observations of animals. Scientists continue to gain a better understanding of animals through the collection of data. As they build that knowledge, the data either supports or refutes previous notions. If I've got an electrical problem in my flat that are beyond my capabilities, I hire a specialist. I listen to them and I trust them. Scientists who devote their lives to animals are our specialists in this field. We need to listen to them and we need to trust them. Decisions relating to the welfare of animals, be it farming practices, animal experimentation, laws protecting animals, endangered species, need to be made with animal welfare sign as the catalyst. They need to be properly reasoned and informed decisions. However, from what I've seen so far in Hong Kong, more often than not, decisions related to animals are being made not backed by science, but rather as an emotional reaction. So what do we know about Hong Kong animal law? The earliest introductions as to the legal requirements to prevent animal cruelty in Hong Kong can be dated back to 1844, during which the Good Order and Cleanliness Ordinance stated that if any individual shall wantonly and cruelly mutilate or ill-use animals without necessity, a fine of no more than $200 shall be imposed. Nearly a century later, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Ordinance came into force in 1935 in order to provide a prohibition and punishment for cruelty to animals. This ordinance remained stagnant until 2006, where an amendment to the law introduced a rise in the maximum penalty for those who commit acts of cruelty to animals. But apart from this, the law has not changed. The cruelty provisions in the ordinance still speak to language better used and more commonly utilised in the Victorian era, with terms like overrides, overdrives, and infuriates forming part of the definition. Cat 169, the primary legislation covering animal welfare in Hong Kong, is a mere 8 sections long, with Section 3, the acts and penalties for cruelty, contributing to the bulk of the ordinance. Despite this, there is still a lack of precision in the wording of the section, and what we're faced with is really a mass of legal, confusing mumbo-jumbo. Of course, as lawyers, we love the grey area because it gives us room for argument as to interpretation. But from an impassioned animal welfare point of view, the law needs to be clear. For example, where a person being in charge of any animal in confinement or captivity or in the course of transport from one place to another neglects to supply such animal with sufficient food and sufficient fresh water, such failure can be seen to be an act of cruelty. One only needs to ask, what does the word sufficiently actually mean? Does it mean a constant supply of fresh running water? Does it mean a bowl? Does it mean it's refilled every hour? Does it mean a simple drink? When the law is unclear, issues arise. Animal cruelty still exists as a summary offence in Hong Kong, a level of offending which the law deems to be not that serious. Your littering offences would be a classic example of a summary offence. A summary offence is strict in time. That means within 6 months of an act of cruelty happening, and information must be laid against the suspect, or else the law prevents you from ever doing so. The 6-month time frame is often too short for authorities to conduct full and appropriate investigations, and to be able to build a proper case to ensure a suspect can be charged with animal cruelty. The time bar remains a significant reason why so few animal cruelty cases are prosecuted. One of the biggest issues which has been raised by many animal scholars in articles and journals has been a lack of the duty of care in our present law. The ordinance remains reactive rather than proactive, so animals must suffer before the law steps in. This is a complete absurdity for a law that is meant to protect animals. The resounding cry for the inclusion of a positive duty of care on persons responsible for animals to provide for their welfare is to ensure a more proactive and educational approach to enhance welfare. The aim is to minimize or obviate the instances where animals suffer at the hands of humans. But despite the calls for the inclusion since 2010, we remain in the dark about when these amendments will actually be incorporated in Hong Kong to form part of our law. In a cliche I've used far too often, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Ordinance is toothless rather than ruthless. Growing up in New Zealand is remarkably different to a child. We do have other ordinances in Hong Kong that look at protecting different types of animals, including wild animals. As with the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Ordinance, although there are laws in place, it doesn't mean we're without problems. Now, the Hong Kong wild boars became an international headline when the government resumed the capture and culling of these animals as a campaign to reduce their numbers in urban areas after reports of animals attacking civilians. Hong Kong authorities would lure these animals out with food before killing them in what was described as despicable and bloody. The move to cull marked a shift in strategy from the government's previous policy of capturing the animals, rendering them unable to breed and then relocating them to remote areas. The use of lethal measures to manage animal populations without first exhausting all other non-lethal methods continues to be completely perplexing. To this day, the question that keeps being asked was whether the cull was necessary. To this day, my answer has been no. Other issues that continue to rear their ugly heads in Hong Kong include the use of glue traps to eradicate pests. I'm sure you'll hear more about glue traps and the harm they do from one of our speakers this afternoon, but they continue to be a cheap and common method used here in Hong Kong. More recently, we've seen the Hong Kong government look at include wild pigeons into the definition of wild animals under the Wild Animals Protection Ordinance. This would mean any person who was caught feeding these birds would be hit with a fine up to $100,000 and a jail term up to 1 year. But the amendments only go so far. Efforts are needed to educate the public about the problems caused by feeding wild animals. Without the requisite understanding as to why things should be prohibited, the law remains only partially effective. It became our little farm and it allowed me to grow an appreciation. Given our geographic location, it's no surprise to learn that Hong Kong has unwittingly become a strategic hub for the illegal wildlife trade and is contributing to the extinction of many threatened species. Our free trade policy and logistical convenience has unfortunately burdened us with this label. But despite our notoriety, there's been little to positively write about in this area. For those who are caught, prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced, the Hong Kong courts also provide little deterrent. Despite the high value of these trafficked goods, the ecological, social, and financial impact of these crimes, and the aftercare needed for these animals, the penalties imposed on the offenders range from fines to rather lenient stints in jail. But I must be fair to the Hong Kong government because we have seen positive moves in this area. We have seen the ban of ivory in Hong Kong. And in 2018, the Protection of Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Ordinance was amended to introduce heavier penalties for smuggling and illegal trade of endangered species. But this still does not fully deter the criminal syndicates coming through Hong Kong. We also have other incredible work done in this area that have led to a better and more robust prosecution and sentencing in wildlife trafficking cases. The Species Victim Impact Statement Initiative, started in 2015 by Professor Whitford, Dr. Caroline Glenn of HKU, and Dr. Gary Aids of Kaduri Farm, has been successfully employed in cases involving the trafficking of endangered and protected species to aid both prosecutors to more effectively present their case at court and to judges to make better sentencing decisions that reflect the seriousness of wildlife crime. The SVIS provides a catalogue of information on the particular species involved, including conservation value, ecosystem impact through exploitation, population depletion, and current monetary value of the species in the black market. By educating both courts and prosecution about the impacts of the offending, the team reported the use of SVIS has resulted in penalty increases of over 2,000% since the initiative began. One issue raised in the fight against wildlife trafficking has been that the authorities have generally targeted the mules that are bringing in the contraband to Hong Kong, instead of directing attention to the masterminds or syndicates behind the operation. After almost 7 years of advocating, the Hong Kong government finally amended the Organised and Serious Crimes Ordinance to include wildlife crime, which now give law authorities the power to freeze assets, of suspected trafficking groups in the hope to deal a significant blow to wildlife criminals. However, and despite the inclusion into the ordinance, whether the powers are properly used or even used at all to ensure more prosecutions of law remains to be seen. All in all, there remains significant inroads to be made in animal-centric legislation here in Hong Kong through the legal system by securing more thorough and protective laws and better enforcement. But how do we know our current legislative regime is inadequate in protecting animals? We do this through a simple compare and contrast with other similar jurisdictions. Even on a purely language-based assessment, we can already see a marked difference. Whilst Hong Kong primary legislation focuses on the prevention of cruelty to animals, other jurisdictions have migrated away from a purely cruelty standpoint, but rather embrace animal welfare as the backbone from which their legislation is built. In New Zealand, the UK, and some states in Australia, animals are supported by the Animal Welfare Act, with an understanding that harm to animals can come in both physical and mental forms. Additionally, the legal obligation of a duty of care has been swiftly adopted and applied to ensure that the welfare of an animal, including the 5 freedoms that we've previously discussed, are properly and reasonably met by those who are responsible. This means the laws are proactive in the way they protect animals, by ensuring that the law can step in to intervene even before an offence is being committed. There are also greater powers given to prosecutors and courts to tackle the issues of animal cruelty by creating proper deterrence through the way cases are prosecuted and sentenced. Heavier sentences are imposed on those who commit callous acts of cruelty to prevent further recidivism. And organisations such as the SPCA themselves bring regular prosecutions against offenders with great effect. The SPCA bringing prosecutions means that it comes with it a level of expertise in animal welfare that us regular Joe Blogs may not have. Animal law and the prosecution of animal cruelty cases require a certain appreciation and understanding to ensure that the voiceless victims are properly represented in court. It's an extremely niche area, and I hope we see more dedicated teams within the Hong Kong Department of Justice assigned to properly tackle these sorts of cases. We've also seen the addition of specific offences in overseas legislation, including dog fighting, mutilation, and the administration of poisons. While the first two are less prevalent here in Hong Kong, the issue of poison and people leaving poison and poison bait are often in areas often frequented by dogs continue to be a problem that is yet to be addressed through adequate legislation and enforcement. What may be the most significant omission from local legislation is the recognition of sentience of animals. Last year, the UK's Animal Welfare Sentience Bill received royal assent to put in law what we already knew and what science has confirmed, that animals are living, feeling beings with complex thoughts and emotions, each able to experience pain, fear, love, and joy. This means policymakers will now need to consider the unique needs of animals when creating laws. We also required the government to establish an animal sentience committee to scrutinise and report on whether the government has taken into account the adverse effects of any policy on the welfare of animals as sentient beings. The UK has had a long history of improving the lives of animals, being the first country to pass legislation to protect animals in 1822 with the Cruel Treatment of Cattle Act, and later the landmark Protection of Animals Act in 1911. Now, our local CAT 169 was established after mirroring the UK's legislation, and yet while the UK has moved positively forwards in leaps and bounds, we still seem to be hamstrung and completely hesitant to enact any change. More often than not, decisions related to animals. It's not only companion animals that have been given greater protections abroad. Wild animals have also been given substantial safeguards. So what do we know about the severe cruelty of glue traps is uncontroversial. Not only are the animals caught in the trap subject to a slow and agonizing death, often through dehydration or injury, but the cruelty is also compounded by the fact that they are non-selective. Any small animal bird, or reptile who crosses over them will be ensnared. Many countries, including Germany, United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, have already recognised that blue traps are inhumane and have had them banned. They are one of the cruelest methods of removing unwanted animals. Despite this, these traps continue to be used in Hong Kong in what is seen as a convenient and cheap way of pest control, but with no consideration as to the harm they do to intended and unintended animals. This is because many of the people who actually use blue traps, including some government agencies, are still unaware of the welfare issues attached to their use. Recent lobbying to EACHK from Ms. Sharon Kwok, who you'll hear from today, asked for the government to consider a three-step process to ultimately ban the use of these in Hong Kong, which I fully support. But whether, when, and if this will be introduced, time will tell. In California, they've just broken ground to mark the start of the construction of a $19 million US wildlife crossing, expected to be completed in early 2025. Project arose as a result of mountain lions being struck and killed by vehicles travelling along the Pacific Coast Highway. The wildlife crossing will see it stretch over the highway so that the wild animals that call the Santa Monica Mountains home, such as coyotes, deer, big cats, are able to freely and safely cross. Part of the beauty of this crossing is that it creates an optimistic precedent for future generations to demonstrate how design can play a restorative role in the natural world. Other countries have also seen positive statistics come as a result of the introduction of wildlife crossings. In Banff, Canada, whose national park has more than 40 wildlife under and overpasses, they found a 90% decrease in wildlife vehicle collisions. Other decisions made for the benefit of wild animals include countries setting aside a portion of land for conservation to protect plants and animals, banning the hunting of species of animals, and ensuring breeding sites and resting places of certain animals are protected by law. The recognition that we continue to colonize the habitat of wild animals, but to then make restorative decisions to ensure there can be harmonious coexistence, only arises with the appreciation that animals are here with us and are worth protecting. The world is also becoming more aware of the vulnerability of animals, mostly because of the excesses of humankind that lead to habits, degradation, pollution, overfishing, and of course, climate change. Countries are pouring significant amounts of money in order to combat the illegal wildlife trade, which is estimated to be worth somewhere in the tens of billions per year. Projects have been put in place to dismantle networks behind wildlife crime, including enhancing law enforcement's capacity to conserve Asian big cats, supporting countries in the conservation of elephants and rhinoceroses as targeted species for ivory and horns, and the enhancement of communications and intelligence sharing between countries through cyber investigation, DNA analysis, and joint enforcement activities to crack down the trade of pangolin and pangolin parts. Pangolin scales remain incredibly high in demand in Asian countries due to their perceived benefit in traditional Chinese medicine, and their meat is considered a delicacy. The scales, comprising mainly of keratin, was a major reason behind the poaching of these animals. There is, however, no scientific evidence showing that pangolin scales are effective as a useful medicinal ingredient. The same goes for bear bile, and you may hear more about this from our next speaker, Karina O'Carroll, of Animals Asia. Bear bile has been used in traditional Asian medicine for thousands of years. It contains high levels of ursodeoxycholic acid, known to be useful to treating liver and gallbladder conditions in humans. However, like pangolin scales, there are now many readily available herbal and synthetic alternatives with the same medicinal properties. By using non-animal alternatives, we aim to see a reduction in both wildlife trafficking of illegal animals and a complete shutdown of farms such as the bear bile farms across Asia. Of course, many of these changes we have seen implemented in overseas jurisdictions have come as a result of years of research, education, and advocacy. In order to properly advocate for change, we need to understand not just what is wrong, but why it is wrong. This recognition only comes through education. One of the most rewarding things I've encountered since starting HKALPO has been the amount of people who are wanting to make a difference to the lives of animals. Every single person can make a difference and make noise about an issue, but the true value that you can achieve comes from an understanding of why there is a problem and what can be done to make a positive change. We can all hold up signs and placards outside EACHK if we wanted to, but what benefit is there if there's no deeper appreciation of the message you are advocating for? Through knowledge and education about issues, it allows us to more effectively craft ways to make things better. A bird does not sing because it has an answer. It sings because it has a song. Hong Kong has unwittingly become a strategic hub for the illegal wildlife. On both an individual and governmental level, we all need to be making decisions on animal welfare that are informed by science. Although emotion and tradition often have been defining reasons why decisions have been made related to animals, especially in Hong Kong, this cannot and should not be what happens. Hong Kong has some of the brightest minds in their respective fields, and it would be a complete failure on those that make decisions to do so unilaterally without even considering the viewpoints of experts that actually know what they're talking about. I don't ever want to see thousands of hamsters being culled in Hong Kong again, nor do I want to see ineffective and untenable legislation continue to be drafted without prior consultation with people who know what they're talking about. Education is not an on-off switch. In fact, there's no end to education. Research has shown that we begin learning in the womb and continue learning throughout our lives until the moment we pass on. So we need to constantly be wanting to improve the lives of animals through the research and studies that we do. We all need a hunger for knowledge because it can not only build a better future for non-human animals, but because it creates better humans too. In Hong Kong, and indeed many places around the world, animals under the law are still considered objects or property. If someone causes damage to my dog and it unfortunately dies, a court is likely only to award damages and compensation equivalent to the value of my dog. If for some reason the dog had been purchased from a pet shop, the value of the replacement is easily ascertained. But for the majority of us who adopt and don't shop, it would be extremely difficult to put a value on your beloved HKALPO. The law also currently has yet to accept the importance of companion animals to families through any award of emotional harm damages. So again, if my wife and I have a HKALPO, which we've raised for the past 10 years, and it passes away as a result of an act by a third party, and this dog was essentially like a child to us, the law does not recognize the emotional harm and damage that this loss would cause to us. Awards for emotional harm and damages for the loss of a pet have been made in courts in other countries, but have not been canvassed in Hong Kong. The disillusioned mindset that animals are things, I think, is one of the reasons why animal cruelty is so prevalent in our community. Failure to consider the sentience of animals and impressing them with the status of an inanimate object allows the justification of why there's nothing wrong with hurting an animal. We also see a sense of speciesism creep into animal cruelty cases. Why is it that a dog or cat's life is more sacred and worth more protecting than that of a pigeon or a mouse? If we are to accept, which we should, that animals are sentient, then each species deserves the same level of protection and respect. If a case of animal cruelty comes before a judge, it should not matter what species the animal is to determine what sentence should be imposed. We aren't in the 1945 Orwellian animal farm, where all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. We live in 2023, where animal welfare science has identified animals as being all capable of having the same feelings as humans have. Other jurisdictions have migrated away from a purely cruelty standpoint. It only remains for me to repeat the importance of speaking out on behalf of animals. We all know animals cannot speak for themselves, so we need to be the voice for the voiceless. Whether this is in court, in research, or in advocating for change, we owe it to animals to speak on their behalf. It's fair to say there's been a recent decline and even hesitation by members of the public to be too outspoken publicly, and I can understand where this reluctance comes from. But if we're not brave enough to raise our voice, then the status quo will prevail. And as we have seen, the status quo is not enough. As the famous Chinese proverb goes, a single tree makes no forest, one string makes no music. A single effort can only achieve so much, but together, much more can be accomplished. Through the way cases are prosecuted and sentenced. Education is the ultimate power of life. The fact that you do not know something or understand something should not be one's Achilles heel, but should be motivation to pursue knowledge. I was recently invited by Year 5 and 6 students at Kowloon Junior School to speak about different areas relating to animals and their welfare. They weren't questions that asked what, they were questions that asked why. The insightfulness of some of the questions given at me gave me great encouragement, as it means important areas surrounding animals and their welfare are already being considered at a young age. Within the Hong Kong Department of Justice, for companion animals, if we have a solid grasp of the 5 freedoms, the needs of the species of pet we care for, and accept that they are sentient, it allows us to better ensure that the proper standards of welfare are met. If we didn't learn and assumed the amount of exercise and food the Doberman needed was the same as that of a Chihuahua, both animals would end up suffering. We as human animals remain entirely responsible for the lives of our non-human companions. We therefore have a moral responsibility to understand everything about those that we care for. Last year, the UK's animal welfare... In just under a month, my wife and I will actually be welcoming 2 baby girls into our family. We are first-time parents, and this journey has been a journey of discovery. But we've ensured that we are prepared for their arrival by reading a library of books, speaking to experts, talking to our own parents, and sharing war stories with other friends. There are things that undoubtedly I, will likely get wrong, but at least we have armed ourselves with enough understanding and knowledge to feel comfortable that we will do a good job. If we consider animals as an extension of our family, then why should there be any hesitation in learning everything there is to know about them and how to ensure that their lives are safe and protected? In 1822, the more we educate ourselves on animals and animal welfare, and the more benefit it brings to humans and non-human animals. The almost innocent facade of animal tourism raises more problems than an overpriced admission unwitting tourists are prepared to pay. Now, I confess I was ignorant to the harm animals were subjected to in some of these animal attractions. The drugging of tigers to allow for the best selfie, the crush of young elephant calves to ensure that they trip along the proper path, the horrendous farming conditions palm civets live in to produce a cup of Puppy Luwak coffee. I had no idea how dark and exploitative it was until I decided to pull back the curtain. But these things are often not spoken about and continue to be seen and continue to be completely innocent to unbeknownst travellers. This is where education forms such a powerful tool to protect animals. If we better arm ourselves with an understanding into the exploitation of animals for the sake of tourists, then we're able to make informed decisions and to choose not to go to these places. Through a reduction of demand by tourists, one hopes that the demand by operators for these animals will also naturally decline. Ultimately, of course, I'd love to see all unethical animal tourism to be made illegal. But until that day comes, the next best thing is to continue to spread awareness of the dangers of these animal tourism experiences. Recent lobbying to HKALPO from Australia. On 23rd of January 2020, Hong Kong confirmed its first case of a virus that would completely reshape the next 3 years of our lives. Recently, there's been reports suggesting scientists have now located the best evidence that points to a particular species of animals as a likely origin of COVID-19. When the virus first emerged, news stories continued to replay the scene of a Huanan wildlife market in Wuhan as a focal point for the initial outbreak, with suggestions that the virus likely first jumped from animals at the market to humans. What we are eating, how we are farming it, and why we are doing so are all important factors for us to research and learn more about to ensure that we can minimize the risk of zoonosis. Through education, we can increase awareness of disease and how they are transmitted, promote wildlife conservation and protection of natural habitats in order to reduce the contact between humans and animals and promote good hygiene practices. Sustainable farming practices and familiarity with how we can eat responsibly are all critical to ensuring that the future generations can also meet their own needs. What we desperately don't want is another rendezvous with a bird flu or a swine flu situation, because we not only failed to heed similar past warning signs, but also because we did not learn from our mistakes. In ensuring breeding sites and resting places of certain animals, I'll forever be an optimist, and there are things I hope we all have the privilege of seeing in the future of Hong Kong animal law and welfare. The world is changing, and so are societal values. As public attitudes towards animal and their treatment evolve, there will inevitably be a demand for law and regulations that better reflect these values. Hong Kong desperately needs to move forward positively by modernising its animal welfare laws so as to remain relevant. Hong Kong is truly privileged to have so many passionate individuals and organisations that continue to serve selflessly to animals. But they can't do this on their own. Now I challenge each and every one of you here today to give a little, be it time, money, or assistance to these organisations. The work they do is truly inspiring, and I'm sure your appreciation of animals will only deepen after having such an experience. As I've attempted to interweave throughout this talk, the importance of education cannot be understated. Education on animal law and welfare should be encouraged at a young age, so that the information that they acquire can be taken through their lives with the hope that one day they will be able to effect positive change too. For others, the greatest tool you can have to ensure animals are properly protected is your own knowledge. By arming oneself with knowledge, you are able to make proper, informed decisions, be it about what you are eating, how you are looking after your pet, or why we shouldn't ride elephants. Knowledge is power. Now, I started this speech with a quote, and I intend to end with one. It's from Animal Farm. Man is the only creature that consumes without producing. He does not give milk. He does not lay eggs. He's too weak to pull the plough. He cannot run fast enough to catch rabbits. Yet he is the Lord of all animals. He sets them to work. He gives back to them the bare minimum that will prevent them from starving, and the rest he keeps for himself. Thank you very much for your time. Complete shutdown of farms such as the Bearbell farms across Asia. Of course, many of these changes we have seen implemented in overseas jurisdictions have come as a result of years of research, education. If not, I'll hand over to our MC. In order to properly advocate change, we need to understand not just what is wrong, but why it is wrong.
I mean, I learned a lot. I know nothing about law, but is there any way that let's say they're going from anywhere else, how do you define animal? Because I think the definition of animal is quite loose. For instance, like what would put animal and make noise and whatnot. I mean, you mentioned a few times already.
Yeah. So under the law of Hong Kong, if you're talking about animals, it really depends on the ordinance that you're looking at, because the definition of animal differs in each and every ordinance. So under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals ordinance, definition is essentially everything. It's extremely wide. But then when you look at different ordinances, then the definition gets a bit more focused. So with wild animals, it defines what a wild animal is. but it excludes companion animals like cats and dogs and things like that. So it really depends when you're looking from a legal perspective about what it is you want to achieve. The first place is what is the law, and then how and whether that animal fits into it. So, I mean, at the moment, the definition of animal is extremely broad when we're talking about cruelty, but it's the rest of it that doesn't really make sense because it's ineffective and it's outdated. So that's the part that really needs to change. Yeah.
I don't ever want to see thousands of hamsters being culled in Hong Kong again, nor do I want to see ineffective and untenable legislation continue to be drafted without prior consultation.
Of course.
Education is not an on-off switch. In fact, there's no end to education. Research has shown that we begin learning in the womb and continue learning.
And that is a big problem. I mean, that example right there, I think, can be explained by the fact that economically it makes sense for animals not to be considered animals in that sense, because if we had to ensure that every fish market had proper welfare standards for the animals and the fish that they were selling, they would be broke. That's why you see fish crammed into tiny polystyrene boxes. They're flapping around. They're not given the proper space, air, ... because economically it makes sense to Hong Kongers to have that happen. But that's why I think we need to change our mindset. All animals need to have the same level of protection. It doesn't matter if it's a cat or dog or your local, groper in the market. Everything is equal. Everything deserves protection.
Also currently has yet to accept the importance of companion animals to families through any award of emotional damages.
Yep.
So again, if my wife and I have a tonga, which we've raised for the past 10 years, and it passes away as a result of an act by a third party,
that one.
and this dog was essentially like a child to us.
I mean, the ocean is a very, it's a very untouched area in terms of the law itself in Hong Kong. I think it will really look at how and why those animals are being caught in these. I'm guessing you're talking about ghost nets. Yeah.
I think it's one of the reasons.
There's a lot of evidence, but the problem is, okay, how did the ghost net get there? Why did it get there? And who am I to blame for that? That's the problem, that's the issue that sort of is the missing puzzle piece in the whole equation. So there are, I'm sure, laws that prevent animals from being caught and tortured in these ghost nets. But the problem is, how did they get there in the first place? Who am I directing my concerns towards?
If we are to accept, which we should, that animals are sentient,
for
each
sure.
species deserves the same level of protection and respect. If a case of animal cruelty comes before a judge,
it's the same with the blue traps we'll talk about later. I mean, there are many different traps available. But blue traps seem to be the cheapest option, so why don't we just use that?
Where all animals are equal, but some animals are more.
It's generally to do with economy in Hong Kong, and that's really the bottom line. If it's cheap, then it'll be used. Welfare really doesn't play a part, which is a shame. It should be the other way around.
We have a question from the people.
Okay.
So the question is regarding the new Hong Kong animal welfare legislation. They ask, what is the current progress and when will it be implemented, from Dr. Alan?
Dr. Alan should know better than you anyway. I mean,
there's been a recent decline.
We have Dr. Woodhouse here, who's been advocating for change for the past 13 odd years. And we're at the point where we're scratching our heads going, any days. We met with the director of AFCD 2 to 3 months ago, and we asked him this question because he did say, look, this is something that's on the table. They know it's important. They know it needs to be done. So we need the public to get behind it. So I asked him, okay, well, give us the time frame. Is it 1 day? Is it 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, a decade? The answer was soon. So it's no, it's sort of crystal ball gazing. But hopefully in the near future, which is a horrible answer, I'm sorry, Alan.
Anybody else from the audience has a
They
question?
weren't questions that asked what.
What's your opinions about now? Conservation has very low value in our government practice.
Surrounding animals and their welfare.
How we can improve the local practice in between departments that they can come into the existing law that we have. For example, like the FCDs, land department, food and hygiene department, LCSD. In all the frontline practice that we have seen, they're not recognizing this, even 169 ordinance themselves. So often we have to explain the law to them, and then whether their attitude or, you know, within the internal politics situation between departments, that we find it very inefficient, undervalued, and we find it's absolutely no conservation concept inside individual department or the way they do work together. They don't recognize their local practice in their general service themselves. What do you think about that?
I think one of the things that I have seen in my time in Hong Kong is that governmental departments don't like to make decisions, and if they are tasked to make a decision, they will pass it on to someone else.
Yeah.
So if it's an AFCD problem, likely they'll say, no, it's a Department of Health or Food and Hygiene problem, and it'll just move to the next table. And so you get this circular problem of the problem going around, but there's no actual answer. I mean, what needs to be done is you put pressure on these departments, and you just make sure that they do what they're meant to do. I mean, you hold them accountable.
We've been doing that for 17 years.
I know, but as Karina says, it's persistence and tenacity. We just have to keep doing it. Like I said, you know, everyone can do a little bit, and together we're much stronger. So to support organisations that advocate for change and put pressure on these departments is really what we can do to start, and until they can recognise that there is a need for change.
Do you see the opportunity, is there any way to either through legal action to press against certain offenders within the service themselves that will send a signal or send a message for them to respect law?
I mean, if they are not doing what they are doing, I'm sure there will be ways to hold them accountable, whether it's internally or externally. It's very difficult for, you know, us public citizens to say, you know, Mr. Chan of AFCD is not doing his job. We need to make sure he does. I mean, there are lots of ways that we can ensure that, but I think it's really an inter-department thing that needs to be focused on. It's very difficult for us to hold, you know, every single government department accountable, because we would have no one to do our own work in lives. 23rd of January 2020, Hong Kong confirmed its first case of a virus that would completely reshape. It's a horrible answer, I know. But recently there's been reports that is the reality. The best evidence that points to.
How do you see the legislature reacting to animal law or conservation concepts?
Well, it's inactive.
Inside.
It's not a priority. There are legislators that do find and appreciate animal welfare, and they do a lot for lobbying and ensuring that laws are passed. But it's not each and every one, which is a shame. But there are people that do care and do continue to fight for animal welfare. Very easy to find if you need to.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McCoy, for your very insightful presentation. I'm sure people will be more aware of how to take care of animal welfare.